Well, ranging from a disappointment to pure outrage, a litany of reactions have emerged in response to the National Energy Regulator of South Africa's decision to grant Eskom a tariff increase of 18.65%. Many have emphasized that the hikes don't address the root causes of issues at the utility. Well, joining me now to discuss the socio-economic and political implications of load shedding is Tessa Dooms, who is the director of the Rivonia Circle. Tessa, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our platform this morning. You know, when we look at many of the conversations that are being had on social media around this issue of load shedding, particularly with the stage 6 having been implemented, you know, we're seeing a lot of people describing what it means to live without electricity for as long as South Africans have been forced to. You know, many people equating electricity, for instance, with safety, equating electricity, for instance, with the difference between life and death. Do you think those with the power to do something about this have a full appreciation of this picture?
You know, I don't think that especially people who are in the government, people who are at the helm of an Eskom, fully understand how it feels to experience load shedding and how it feels to experience those consequences in the same way that the majority of South Africans do. I think as an intellectual exercise, it's obvious that you can make those links and you can understand intellectually, but this is not just about an intellectual exercise or an analytic exercise. It's about the actual fear that people experience when they realize that they're going to be in a informal settlement or in a township area at night, and they're not going to feel safe because there are no street lights, or because of load shedding. We're not going to have water pumping in certain areas because water is attached to electricity. So in terms of what that means for people's levels of discontent, their levels of frustration, their levels of feeling helpless to do certain things in their own lives, that I don't think people have a full appreciation for. And I think what is also missing from this conversation is the idea that the temperature in terms of our emotions and the frustrations that we're seeing on platforms like Twitter and social media are really coming from a subsection of our society where something like electricity has become one of the few things that people who have some sort of resource in the country can solve for themselves. But for the majority of South Africans, there are many people in the country for whom having no electricity, either because that the areas have never been supplied with consistent electricity, or because they just experience ongoing blackouts. The load shedding increasing to stage 6 means very little to some people because they have a consistent problem with electricity supply in their areas and in their communities. And so you have this tension between a subsection of society that feel like they could do something in their own means if we had a different regulatory environment. But you also have people in society for whom load shedding stage 6 is only one of many things that is inhibiting the dignity, the safety, and the ability for them to run their own lives successfully. And so the level of outrage is just different because for some people this is the biggest issue, and for other people this is just one of a litany of things that they're having to deal with and contend with. Yeah.
You know, Tessa, when we look at people, who patently are actually able to do something about this energy crisis, we look at people in the executive positions at the utility itself. We look at public officials, elected officials, government officials who have that, like I mentioned, that patent ability to do something about this crisis. When we look at their responses, what are your thoughts on that? From the National Energy Crisis Committee to the President, to leaders of opposition parties. We just had a conversation with Action SA leader Herman Mashaba, who, for a majority of his response, really laid the blame at the foot of the governing party. I asked about, well, what about solutions from the opposition, for instance? So when we look at the responses collectively, what would you say is lacking?
Certainly, I think from the point of the ruling party, from the ANC, it's been quite disturbing to watch ANC ministers, ANC leaders, speak about load shedding in the same terms as the rest of us, speak about it as if they are an outside party, to the governance that has brought us to this crisis or to the people who could resolve this crisis. At best, you have the president starting to talk again about another committee that he's relying on, getting briefings, but very little solutions-oriented talk. I think this week, for the first time, we heard Gwede Mantashe, start to make claims that actually load shedding could be solved in 6 to 12 months. But if that was the case, number one, why is it not being done yet? And number two, what are the actual steps that need to be taken that can assure South Africans that he knows how to do that? So from the point of the governing party, we've had a sensibility that the party feels as helpless about load shedding as the rest of society does, which is extremely concerning, especially for a party that calls itself the leader of society and has got the majority of the power in the country to do something about it. From the point of opposition parties and the point even of general civil society, one of the issues around load shedding, it's like the unemployment crisis, is that the crisis has become so complex and so wide-ranging that I think people are struggling to figure out where to begin and where to even start to ask for different levers to be pulled by government, different levers to be pulled within Eskom. There's a general sense that we are even grappling with what the range of problems are. We've been introduced to this idea of sabotage, the idea that you have service providers who are not delivering quality coal or not delivering coal at all. You add to that the failures in finishing and completing power stations. You add to that the renewables debate. So the complexity of the issue has us with, political leaders, civil society leaders, who are trying to figure out what is the right lever to pull and what's the right response that will make the quickest impact. And I should think that we haven't gotten to the point where we're very clear about what the solutions are, at least in the short term. And that makes it a really difficult national conversation to have, because we're having a conversation where we are lamenting towards each other, but we're not having a conversation about the real solutions that need to be on the table. And I think, our sense of hopelessness has overcome us, and unfortunately that's as true, it seems, for political leadership as it is for the rest of the country. Right.
Talking about that sense of powerlessness, of hopelessness, Tessa, another conversation that we often see sort of adjacent to the national debate around the energy crisis is what South Africans should do. How should we collectively as a citizenry be responding to this crisis? You have some corners sort of quashing the idea of a national shutdown or a protestation or a demonstration of some sort, equating it to something similar to, the Arab Spring, for instance. But you also have, some quarters of society saying, well, hang on, we have an opportunity come 2024 to do something about this. Is enough noise being made, 2024 rather, to do something about this? Is enough noise being made around the power that voters, that the citizenry have as participants of this democracy when it comes to this issue of energy?
Certainly. One of the narratives overwhelmingly has been, we're not angry enough as a nation. And I really don't think that's true. I think we are sufficiently angry. I think many people in this country are angry enough that they are willing to take to the streets on many issues. People have lost their lives just in the last 12 months, taking to the streets, protesting about a wide variety of issues. But as I said earlier, the issue around electricity is a more complex issue, because if you're going to take to the streets, if we're going to en masse, shut the country down, we need to shut the country down knowing what the outcome would be. That's why you shut the country down. That's why you take to the streets. That's why you protest. And that's why you'll find many communities, even just this week, there have been shutdowns of highways in the country. So it's not that there's an inertia and people feel that they wouldn't do anything. They're not angry enough. It's that an issue like Eskom says, if we are going to shut down the country, what are the core demands? So I've said a few times in the last few weeks that what we really need to know from experts, from analysts, from people in the space, what are the 3 or 4 key turning points that we can ask for right now, that government is in a position to do something about right now that would take us a step forward? And that's in the immediate, to medium term. We need that. In order to take to the streets, you need to know what your demand is. I think the bigger question that you've asked about 2024 is a vital one, because the biggest demand is a question for leadership and a question for clear vision and a pathway out of this. We need a turnaround strategy from a government. And this has to become an election issue for 2024. If any party wants a vote in 2024, they need to come to the country with a clear, unambiguous and workable turnaround strategy for Eskom. And voters need to know that we have the power to demand that. We have the power to make sure that nobody gets our X unless they are able to do something and give us a clear path out of this crisis. So 2024 is absolutely important, because when you have an issue as big as something like electricity, as big as something like unemployment, you're not going to be able to fix it in a patchwork way. You're going to have to fix it with a dramatic change structurally and a dramatic change in leadership.
Well, Tessa, thank you so much for coming onto our program and sharing your insights with us. That's Tessa Dooms, who is the director of the Rivonia Circle. Up next.